Hello everybody, my name is Tom Burns and welcome to episode 2 of my podcast. Give me a second, that's better. Hang on. Yeah, that's better. Now I apologise that I've kept delaying this podcast. It's just been one thing after another, and then I tried to set it up on my PC not long ago. Earlier in today, I set everything else up. I was just sorting my green screen out. As you can see behind me, my green screen is there. And it wouldn't work. My PC kept freezing. It wouldn't let me use the green screen. There was issues after issues, and I just thought, you know what, fuck it. I'm not delaying this any longer. My PC just didn't want to work. Hopefully by the time I do my next episode of this podcast, which it will be all about WrestleMania, everything will be working again. I'll try my best anyway. If not, we'll do it like this again. So as you can see by the title of this video, it is the Tom Burns Podcast episode 2, and it is all about the Benoit tragedy. What's going on here? Hang on a minute. Give me a second. Something's going on. I'm supposed to have a picture here in the corner, but for some reason it's not doing it. I don't know what's going on. I don't know where that picture is gone in the corner. Oh, there we go. Now it's turned up. Okay. So yeah, basically, that's perfect on the stream. It's perfect on me. I'm being covered by them pictures. But anyway, so basically, yeah. So the episode 2 of my podcast is all about the Benoit tragedy. Let's just mute that. I understand that you probably can't hear me very well because obviously I'm using the mic from my phone and my phone's quite a distance away from me, but there's not a lot I can do. I tried my best to make the stream as professional as I could. I even had like an office thing behind me for the podcast, because I was going to use my green screen and it looked like I'd be sat in an office. I tried to make it as professional as I could, and maybe that's what fucked my computer up because it was just too much. I don't know. I'll have a look at it. Maybe we need to not use the green screen for the podcast anymore. But anyway, this is all about the Benoit family tragedy. Now, of course, most people, even if you're not a fan of wrestling, most people will have heard of the Benoit family tragedy. But before I get into it, I want to stress that my opinions that I will be saying in this video are my opinions and my opinions alone. Nobody else has told me to say these things. These are nobody else's opinions. This is literally just a podcast about my opinions and what I think happened, just talking about it, just basically enlightening people to the tragedy of people that haven't heard of it before, and yeah, simple as really. But yeah, for those of you who haven't heard of the Benoit family tragedy, basically, WWE wrestler Chris Benoit, the guy in the picture at the top, he murdered his wife, who's in the bottom left, and his son, who's in the bottom right. So Nancy Benoit and Daniel Benoit. That was his wife's name and his son's name. Basically, that's what he did. He murdered his family and then killed himself. Lots and lots of conspiracies, controversies, and all sorts coming out throughout the years about Benoit and what actually happened. Did Benoit do it? Did he not? Did somebody else do it? Was he murdered? Did Kevin Sullivan do it? Did one of the other conspiracies I heard was that Nancy came home. Nancy had killed Daniel. Nancy had killed Daniel. Chris got annoyed and then killed Nancy because she killed Daniel. One of the stupidest fucking conspiracies I've ever heard, to be honest. But yeah, all I'll say about it is, what I'll say is the conspiracies that I've heard and the controversies and stuff like that. Some of them, I suppose some of them make a little bit of sense, but then that one about Chris coming home, seeing that Nancy killed Daniel, and then killed Nancy because she killed Daniel, is just idiotic and stupid. Even if Chris had come home and saw that Nancy killed Daniel, why would his automatic reaction be to kill Nancy? His automatic reaction would be, well, first of all, to get answers to why she did it, and second of all, he would phone the police and get her arrested. You know what I mean? Your reaction wouldn't be to kill your wife. If I had a kid and a wife, and I was out at work, and I came home and I saw that my wife had killed my kid, as annoyed as I would be, my first reaction would not be, you know what, I'm going to stab you and I'm going to kill you. No, my first reaction would be, why? Why did you do it? What happened? Why did you do it? And then my next reaction would be, right, I'm phoning the police. And that would be it. Like, never, unless you're psychotically unstable, your first reaction is not going to be, oh, I'm going to kill you for killing my son. No. But anyway, that's they're just a couple of conspiracies I've heard. There's plenty more out there. I mean, people are still speaking about it to this day. I mean, like I'm doing a podcast about it, but this is not a podcast about conspiracy theories and what I really think. Well, it is about what I think happened and stuff like that. But this is not me about trying to still figure out what's happened. This is just me giving my opinion on what I think happened, because that's all we can do. All we can do is give our opinions on what has happened. That's all we can do. There's nothing else we can do. But I know this is a very sensitive subject to talk about. I know it's not really a subject a lot of people talk about anymore, but I want my podcast to be a no limits podcast. I literally talk about anything wrestling related, whether it's controversial or not, and that's what I want my podcast to be known as. I mean, what are we at? 8 minutes. I've been talking for 8 minutes. I've not even really properly got into it yet, but yeah, I mean, this podcast hasn't really got a structure to it. I mean, the last one had a structure. I had on my phone in my notes, I had a load of different things that I wanted to go through and cover, and favourite Rumble winner, stuff like that. But this one hasn't really got that sort of structure, because it's hard really to, when it's this sort of podcast where you're talking about a tragedy or something like that, it's hard to really, for it to have a structure. I just wanted this to be a bit of a free style sort of podcast episode, and just talk about it and just go from there. But yeah, so first of all, yeah, so like I said, for the people that haven't heard about the Benoit family tragedy, Chris Benoit murdered his wife and his son. That's what forensics say, that's what the police have said, and that should be the end of it. But it's not, is it? Because look at the Benoit photo that I've chosen, and the reason I chose that Benoit photo is because that's how we remember him. In a wrestling ring, holding a championship up, that was the best moment of Benoit's career. That was one of the favourite moments for a lot of people from WrestleMania. I know it's one of my favourite WrestleMania moments even still, even after what he did, because I remember him like that. I don't remember him for what he did outside the ring. I remember him for what he did inside the ring. And that's just my honest opinion. I think that obviously you can't ignore what he did outside the ring, because what he did outside the ring was very, very severe. But you shouldn't. You also shouldn't let that cloud your judgment. But yeah, what I will say is that it's one of these things that people, wrestling fans, for a long, long while yet, are still going to talk about. They're still going to talk about it. It's still going to be seen as a controversial subject. People are going to still question, oh, did he do it? Did he not? We'll never ever know properly. The only people who know exactly what happened are Daniel, Nancy, and Chris, and they are all dead. There was no, back then in 2007, there wasn't really proper like surveillance cameras and stuff like that. People didn't really have them in their houses. A lot of high-end celebrities have cameras in their house now and on the outside of the house, just for safety. But back then, I mean, they didn't, because it weren't really seen as a proper thing to do, because they didn't really have many decent surveillance cameras. So it was, if they had, then we would be able to see. But the police and the forensics, what they did, and all the research and all the evidence that they collected, all point towards Benoit doing this. So why do we to this day still talk about it and still try and find an explanation to it and try and defend Benoit? And the easy answer is because, like I said, we remember him like in that picture. We remember him from them times. We Benoit fans, and I was a massive Benoit fan, don't want to see the bad in him, because he was such a great wrestler, one of the greatest technical wrestlers of all time, if not the greatest. And I don't care what anybody says. If anybody says any different, you don't know what you're talking about, and that's just my opinion. And it's such a shame that such a amazing career is now clouded by what he did outside the ring. It's such a shame that such an amazing career, the best, greatest technical wrestler of all time, won't be inducted into the Hall of Fame because of what he did outside the ring. And it is really, really sad. And I've watched all the documentaries. There's been a few different documentaries, but the main one of course being on Dark Side of the Ring. And I have watched Dark Side of the Ring. I think I watched it twice actually, and it's just harrowing to watch and to listen and stuff like that. I mean, he sent Chavo and I believe somebody else text messages saying that the back door's open and the dogs are in the garage. I mean, does that sound like a man that is of sane mind? And the reason why I bring that up, in a sane mind, is because, and it's as simple as this, I've seen a few videos and a few people talking, in the wrestling business, wrestlers who are in WWE still to this day, who were around in them days, people that aren't in WWE but were wrestling in them days in WWE. And I've heard many people talk about it, and I've heard many people say that Benoit was one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet backstage. He was one of the nicest guys. And a lot of fans who met him said the same thing. And the reason why I bring up his sane mind is because you listen to what he texts Chavo and somebody else, saying that the back door's open and the dogs are in the garage. That isn't somebody that's of sane mind. And I bring it up because I've seen many comments from many different people who were wrestling back then, or were fans back then, maybe not fans anymore but remember it. And a lot of people are dismissing what's it called now? what's it called? Um, I can't remember what the actual fucking illness is called. What's it called? Oh, what's it called? CTE. CTE. So, this is what I was talking about. So, many people, I've seen it online, I've seen it online, I've seen fans say it, I've seen videos of wrestlers that are still wrestling now that were wrestling back then. Many people dismissing the CTE, saying that it doesn't matter that he had CTE, Benoit chose to do this. Look, what I will say about that is, if you really believe that, if you really think that dismissing CTE is the best thing to do, if you think that CTE had nothing to do with this, that Benoit chose to do this, that he had control, you're an idiot. You're a plain idiot. And one of the most popular videos that's still going around to this day is Paul Heyman was doing a talk, and I don't know how many years ago it was. I think it was probably about 2 years ago. It weren't years and years ago. It was in recent years, and he was doing a talk, and somebody in the crowd kept shouting at Chris Benoit. Now, I understand Paul Heyman being annoyed, and that might be why he said what he said. And I'm not gonna go through the whole video. I'm not going to go through the whole video. I mean, all I'll say is that Paul Heyman was one of these people dismissing CTE. He said, and I'm not going to say and I quote because I can't remember exact words he said, but he said something like, "Fuck CTE." It weren't CTE. Three people died in that house. 2 people didn't have a choice. 1 person did, and then he was like, "Fuck him." And it's like, did he say that because that person annoyed him because he kept shouting out Benoit, 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 or does he actually believe that? Because if Paul Heyman truly believes the words he's saying, then why is he called the wise man? Because to say that shows that he's not wise at all. It shows that he's actually quite stupid and ignorant when it comes to certain subjects. And I've never disliked Paul Heyman. He's always been a heel, really, but I've never disliked him. I've always thought he was a nice guy. I always thought he talked sense. I always thought, he always got behind the right wrestlers. Like he always got behind CM Punk, and that was the right thing to do because Punk is one of the greatest of all time in my opinion. You know what I mean? So he has his good qualities, and I've never ever seen him be stupid before. He's always been very wise, and then to hear him say all this, it's like, are you actually stupid, Paul? Are you saying this because you want to piss this person off that's been shouting out Benoit, or do you actually believe what you're saying? Now, I'll probably never know because Paul Heyman's not going to come out and say if he really meant what he said or not, and I'm never going to speak to Paul Heyman. And even if I did meet him in a meet and greet or something like that, it's the last thing I'm going to think about asking him, because you only get a certain amount of time with a person at a meet and greet. and I'm not going to waste my time by asking him that question, because the likelihood is that he's not even going to answer me properly. He's going to get pissed off because I'm asking about Chris Benoit, and that's somebody that nobody wants to talk about. Sorry. You heard all my farting then. My bad. I apologise. I apologise right now for the fact that you heard my farting there. My belly's hurting, and I needed to let it go because my belly was really bad. So I apologise about that. The fact you heard that, I didn't know if you'd heard it or not, but you did. Anyway, back to the podcast. How long have we been streaming for now? 21 minutes. Yeah, back to the podcast. I mean, yeah, so Paul Heyman saying that stuff, I think he's an idiot for saying that stuff. I hope that he just said it because he wanted to piss that guy off, because the guy pissed him off. But that's by the by. I mean, I bring in CTE because he wasn't of sane mind, and somebody texting the back door's open and the dogs are in the garage. That's not, unless, the only way you would text that, right? So if I was to text that, that would be, if somebody was coming to look after my dogs, right, and I don't have dogs. My mum has dogs, but I don't have dogs. But if I had dogs and somebody was coming to look after my dogs, and they were coming to my house, I would text them saying, right, the back door's unlocked. I've left the dogs in the garage because I can't trust them in the house. Something like that. Like I would tell them beforehand. I'll text you about the house, and I don't keep the dogs in the house because I don't trust them when I'm out, so I'll put them somewhere. So then I'd text them saying, the back door's open, or the back door's unlocked, the dogs are in the garage. They would understand why the dogs are in the garage, and they'd know why the back door is unlocked, so they can get in. That would be the only reason, but to randomly text that to Chavo, who wasn't, scheduled to look after the dogs or anything like that, it was just a random text, that ain't somebody of sane mind. And that's why I brought that up, because I wanted to also bring up people dismissing CTE, because anybody dismissing CTE is an idiot. Like, we don't know, like, anybody, unless you've had CTE or unless you've got CTE, you don't know what it does to you. But apparently, he had the brain of an 85-year-old dementia patient or Alzheimer's patient. Now, people who have Alzheimer's or dementia, they are classed as not knowing what the fuck they are doing. If somebody in my care home stabs somebody and they have dementia or Alzheimer's, nothing would happen to them, because they'd be like, oh, well, they've got dementia, they've got Alzheimer's. They don't know what they were doing, and you literally can't do anything because they're not of sane mind. They're not, they're not of sound mind. They don't know what they're doing. So you physically can't charge them with anything if they're not mentally stable, which people with dementia aren't. Well, if they've got really bad dementia, that is. My grand's got dementia, but her dementia is very, very slight. Like, the only thing that she's affected is her memory. Like, she's not aggressive, she's not changed as a person, she's just very forgetful. But yeah, I mean, you can't dismiss CTE, and basically what I'm saying is, if Benoit had been diagnosed with CTE/Alzheimer's before he murdered his wife and child, he wouldn't have been charged for it. He would have been locked up in an insane asylum, or maybe a care home, or something like that, but he would not have been charged in a court of law, because you can't charge somebody with dementia/Alzheimer's in the court of law. But because he wasn't diagnosed with anything beforehand, only after he'd done it, people were like, oh, he did it, he was in sane mind, he had the choice. Even people who are supposed to be wise, like Paul Heyman, are saying the same thing, and it's like, are you stupid? Now, I don't want to keep going on and on. I hope you've enjoyed the episode so far. Now, we all know when the downfall of Chris Benoit started, when Eddie Guerrero passed away, and in the Dark Side of the Ring episode, the Chris Benoit one, they talked a lot about what happened with Eddie Guerrero and how badly it affected him, and he was affected for months and months after it. I mean, he never fully got over it. I mean, he was affected by Eddie Guerrero's death longer than what his wife was affected by it. Like Vicky Guerrero, I wouldn't say she got over it quickly. You don't really ever get over something like that, but she managed to sort of move on from it a hell of a lot quicker than Chris ever did. I mean, Chris used to come over when he used to come over to Vicky's house after Eddie Guerrero passed away to see Vicky and the girls. He would go upstairs and lie on Eddie's side of the bed and just cuddle the pillow and cry. And that is just sad to think, like this man who many people said didn't really show much emotion before Eddie Guerrero passed away, literally reduced to just lying on the side of the bed of his late best friend and cuddling his late best friend's pillow and just crying. It's awful and so sad to see. And it must have been devastating for his friends and family to see him that way. And he never fully got over Guerrero's death, and that was the beginning of the end for Benoit. It was. If Eddie Guerrero hadn't passed away, God knows, maybe Benoit would still be alive. I don't know. All I will say is that Eddie Guerrero's death was the beginning of the end for Benoit, and we all know that. I mean, I still think that there's some inconsistencies. This is my opinion now on what I think happened. I still think there's some inconsistencies. I still think this thing's not right. I still think even though he had CT and he had the brain of an 85-year-old dementia patient or Alzheimer's patient, I still believe to do what he did, even if he wasn't of sane mind, something either must have triggered him to do it or something else happened entirely. I don't know. I really, really don't know. Because even people with dementia and Alzheimer's, yes, they can get aggressive. But for them to get to the point where they will stab you and suffocate you, because he stabbed Nancy and suffocated Daniel, for him to get to that point, I don't know what happened. Something must have triggered in his brain and he just snapped. I don't know what it was. Don't know. Nobody will ever know. But I truly believe that either something like that happened or something entirely different happened. Now, I'm not going to say what because I don't know what. I'm not going to accuse anybody of killing him because I don't know if he was killed. You know what I mean? I mean, it's just... I really don't know. Nobody knows. Nobody ever knows. And we can discuss this until the end of times. And we'll never know because the only 3 people who know what happened are now dead. Chris, Nancy and Daniel. And it's just sad. It's just very, very sad. And it's so sad as well that somebody's legacy whose was as good as Benoit's, like I said, greatest technical wrestler of all time in my opinion, the fact that it's been tarnished and the fact that he'll never be inducted into the Hall of Fame, which he so rightly deserves for his in-ring ability, it's just sad that he'll never get that. His WrestleMania moment at WrestleMania 20, one of the greatest WrestleMania moments of all time, will forever be removed from history because of what he did. It's just sad. It's just so sad, and I feel for the Benoit fans because I am a Benoit fan. You know what I mean? I want him to be celebrated for what he did in the ring, but because of what he did outside of the ring was that bad, he'll never be able to be celebrated, and it's understandable. I'm not out here saying that he should be celebrated anyway. I'm not saying that. But what I did like about the Dark Side of the Ring documentary, and I am coming to the end now. Because I don't want to keep going on and on. But what I will say is about the documentary. What I liked about the end of it. The very end, one of the last bits that was one of the last sort of things that was said. Nancy's sister was asked, "Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive Chris for what he did?" Sorry. And she said, I think so, one day. Won't be today, won't be tomorrow, but I will be able to forgive him one day. If you can forgive somebody for murdering your nephew and your sister, you can forgive anything. And I think what people need to realise is that wasn't Benoit. That wasn't Chris that did that. It was an alternate persona. His Alzheimer's persona. His aggressive Alzheimer's persona that did it. What we need to remember is the Chris that we knew and we loved, that we saw in the wrestling ring, was the real Chris. A lot of people said it backstage. That was the real Chris. A load of people loved him. It was evident by the tribute show. Not one person had a bad thing to say about him. Everybody said how amazing he was, how much of a lovely guy he was, how much they relied on him, and how much they were there, how much he was there, for them and stuff like that. And you don't say that about somebody who's not a nice guy. You just don't. And I want people to remember that was the real Chris. The Chris that killed Nancy and Daniel and killed himself was not the Chris that we knew and we loved. That was just somebody that had brain damage, CTE, and was just changed into a completely different person. That's the person that did it. It wasn't Chris. It was his alternate persona. And that's all I can say. Don't think there's much else for me to really touch on there. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast. I know it's a very sensitive subject to talk about, but I wanted my podcast to be known as a podcast that has no limits. That literally, I'll talk about anything. And that's what I want it to be known as. Simple. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've enjoyed the podcast. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast, the episode 2, the Benoit tragedy. It's been a long time coming. I've delayed it twice. Could have delayed it again because my PC just wasn't working, but I was like, no, not delaying it this time. But next episode of the Tom Burns podcast will be all about WrestleMania. I'll be doing it before WrestleMania weekend, which is the April 1st and 2nd, so I've got just over a month to be able to fit it in. In fact, we're in the last day of Jan now, aren't we? So it will be it'll be the 1st and 2nd of April. That's when WrestleMania is. So I'll do the next episode of my podcast in March at some point. I mean, I want to try and do one podcast a month. Basically, that's what I'm trying to say. So I did my first episode about the Royal Rumble was done in Jan. My second episode was done the last day of Feb. My third episode, all about WrestleMania, will be done in March. If you've got some ideas about subjects that I can dedicate episodes to in this podcast, it's all about wrestling. Then put them in the comments down below, and maybe I'll get round to them, because I don't honestly know what my next podcast will be about after the WrestleMania one. I honestly don't know. But yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this podcast. I hope that I haven't offended anybody with any of the comments that I made or anything like that. That was not the intent. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed it, and I shall see you for the next episode of the podcast at some point next month. I don't know exactly when. Keep an eye out on the community tabs. I don't know when I'll be doing another normal stream either, because I need a new... that's another thing as well. I will say before I end this podcast, I apologise for not doing the birthday stream on the Saturday like I said I was going to. I was setting it all up, was going to do it on Saturday morning. I was going to do a pretty much an all day stream. I was going to do The Sims, and then I was going to play a bit of Hogwarts Legacy. And it just all went pear-shaped because my capture card is not working. I need a new capture card. Don't know when I'm going to be able to purchase one, but I'll fit a stream in it. I'll do some streams at some point, but it'll be from my PlayStation, so there'll be no camera. But you'll hear me at least. Yeah, I hope you all enjoyed this podcast, and I'll see you for the next one very soon. Bye bye.